Welcome to the Vocal Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Lee Martin Thomas. Join me and my guest speakers as they discuss the journey they've had with their own voice, as well as light bulb moments, stories, and personal wisdoms. Vocal Freedom is a bi-weekly podcast raising awareness about vocal health and well-being from members of the voice community. My guest this week is Janet Schell, a mezzo-soprano, a prize-winning recital singer both here and in France, and was the first singer to sing live on Classic FM. She has sung with the Welsh National Opera, English National Opera and the Royal Opera House, but it is for her oratorio and recital singing that Janet is best known. Over the years, she's given many opera gala concerts for celebrated guests and royalty, and had some unique experiences, including singing for the Spice Girls and David Walliams, giving singing lessons to the late Errol Brown of Hot Chocolate fame, and singing for a royal wedding at Hampton Court Palace. With the COVID-19 outbreak, Janet currently teaches singing online at St Paul's Girls' School, Eton College, and privately. She founded Talking Voice Limited, where she coaches classroom teachers on their voice use and vocal health, and corporate clients on excelling in presentations. At the moment, that is all online. Janet is also the communications director of AOTOS, the Association of Teachers of Singing, and has a show on Brooklands Radio. I would love to ask you the first question, which is, how would you describe your journey with your own voice?
Hello, I'll say that first of all, and thank you for inviting me. Definitely a roller coaster, but a good roller coaster, and that's simply because as we go through, you'll hear that I've had some issues with my voice that I've had to overcome. And you know, the thing about voice is, of course, it's so much part of you. It's who you are, how you present yourself to the world. And when you've chosen to invest in that, you're going to have a much closer relationship with it than perhaps somebody who hasn't chosen to use it in a professional capacity. So yes, I mean, there's been some vocal hurdles to overcome, but it's made me more aware and I think more pertinently perhaps about the way that I use my voice now.
Okay, so I'm very excited to speak with you because you're in the glamorous world of opera, which is not a journey I've been on myself. And I would just love to know what it was like to become, to be a little girl that became an opera singer. I mean, how fascinating for our listeners.
Well, that's funny you should say that, because I'm just preparing a talk at the minute, which I have been asked to do about from the village that I used to live in was a place called Port Sunlight, which was from the soap magnate William Lever. And actually one of my friends, I wrote a book about it, and she said it's really like you've gone from soap to opera, which I thought was a brilliant title for a chapter.
Opera. Yes. That's
which
amazing.
I use. And so you're right. I mean, my background from being a young child to where I ended up, I mean, is an incredible journey, simply because I wasn't in the kind of environment where classical music was played a lot, except that my mother loved it. The only other thing was, in my family, I had a cousin who was who's a little older than me and was becoming a professional singer, was at music college. And I loved her voice, and her husband was a singer too. So I knew I could sing. I sang everywhere. And I wanted to be Julie Andrews at the time.
Oh, wonderful.
But, from those very humble working class root beginnings, and that's what I want to say, is that there is this perception, I think, that if you go into opera, you've come from a certain background, you've had some advantages, maybe a more advantaged background. But I'd like to say, certainly in my day anyway, that I did it by sheer determination, by thinking that I wanted to do this more than anything else. I didn't go straight there. Often you find that people have circuitous routes to get where they want to go, and mine was a bit more circuitous. But from a little girl, I just knew I wanted to sing and I had it in my sights. And so I was very fortunate that I had one or two people who believed in me and helped me along the way. One of whom, actually, and I can now say this because he's died, was in fact the third Lord Leverhulme, who was the grandson of the magnate from the village. And when I couldn't get any money to go to Guildhall, because I'd already had all my money for teacher training, because I was a teacher first, and I was, I had nobody to turn to. I didn't have family members that would stump up for me. And it looked like I wasn't going to be able to take up my place at Guildhall. And at the 11th hour, I wrote to Lord Leverhulme and said, look, I went to Port Sunlight. I grew up there. I remember you coming to the school when I was a little girl. I, in fact, read a poem out to the whole school when he was there. And my father said, oh, he'll never give you the money, Janet. What are you going on about? But he paid for my 2 years at Guildhall. And those philanthropists and those people who are, like the Bill Gates of this world, who have the money and then know that part of that responsibility, in a way, or civil duty, if you like, a moral duty maybe, is to be able to share some of that out and to help others who couldn't get there otherwise. So really, from that place, and yes, I'm quite emotional talking about it because I've just been writing about it. But without that help, I wouldn't be where I am today. And it's little moments in your life. Sometimes an opportunity presents itself where you have to create that opportunity, and that's the turning point for you.
That's an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing that. So humble beginnings. Bit like me, actually, back in Wiltshire, grew up on a council estate. Well, I say that. I mean, in Wiltshire, it's not that bad, actually. You see, it's not exactly high rise, but yeah, I mean, I had to get a grant from my local authority to go to drama school. For example, I didn't come from a wealthy family, and I think it's a little bit better now for students who want to go into the arts. Most of the courses you can get funding for. I mean, then there's the whole student loan business, but at least it's a little bit easier to get your foot in the door if you don't have the money to pay for the tuition yourself. So, yeah, I mean, that sounds incredibly like you must have just been jumping around the room when you just got that,
It was a letter that we got, and I mean, I think my parents had to sit down. They couldn't believe it either. And one of my uncles was thought it was impertinence for me to do that.
Oh, really? No, but it was also it was entrepreneurial in a way, wasn't it? Because you were like, well, you know what, I'm gonna make my future dreams come true. But that's so wonderful. So you went to Guildhall,
yeah.
And how was your training there? How does it feel looking back?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was at Guildhall in the days when they just assumed that everybody was going. We were talking about this recently with some friends, that they made the assumption that everybody was going to be a singer, come what may, a performer, which in one sense is great because it funnels you and it channels you, and it means the contact hours that we had, huge amounts. When I look at my daughter's university contact hours, she had about 3 hours in her final year. It was ridiculous. Whereas that was so full on. And because I hadn't done, I was put in at year 3 to do the last 2 years of an associate course. So I hadn't had all the language training either. So I had to go and do language classes to catch up. I mean, I was doing German classes with the first years, which included people like Bryn Terfel at the time.
Wow, wonderful.
And that I was sort of in there trying to catch up on this German, trying to translate songs. I mean, it was very full on, but it was a marvelous environment. Nowadays, I think that the colleges and the conservatoires have a broader aspect. They realise that not everybody's going to be, not everybody can be a world-class singer making their whole living from it. I'm afraid that's the situation. It's always been a slightly overproduced profession anyway. But in those days, they didn't give you any other alternatives. They didn't give you anything about business. They didn't give you anything about how to you had a little bit on how to teach. But actually, even that wasn't, really taken that seriously certainly by the students. But what it did do was I had some of the best coaching and excellent singing lessons, not excellent singing lessons, I mean, excellent tuition. I mean, I used to come out of my lessons crying sometimes because I thought I was rubbish. And I don't teach that way myself. I never want anybody to feel that when they come out of the room from me. I want them to be empowered and enriched and feel that they've got something that they can offer. So, my journey as a teacher is very different to what I experienced, but that was kind of because of the times it was as well, I think. Well, I'd like to think.
Yes, I'd like to think too. But you've come out of it unscathed. You went on to have a fantastic career. And I'd love to hear about any of your highlights. I mean, some of the places you must have been touring and...
Well, I was... when I came out of Guildhall, I went straight into a company called Kent Opera, which existed at the time, which was great because it was like doing theatre rep. So you were there, you were in the chorus, but you all started like Glyndebourne, really. You start off in the chorus, but you get singled out. And I was always singled out, along with others, of course, to do understudy roles and to do concerts and to do everything. And then you toured around the southeast of England, we did, because obviously it's Kent Opera. So we went to all sorts of places and did amazing concerts and operatic performances, and we were in Canterbury in 1987 when the big storm came in, which Michael Fish, the newscaster,
yes,
the
I remember this.
Caster had said no, it won't happen, and then we were in the middle. Half the cast couldn't get down from London. We had a performance that night. All the understudies, including me, were going on that night, and then eventually the cast did make it down, but that was quite a scary moment, but you have to be ready, and the way my training had done that, it had helped me get there. I've done a lot of opera gala concerts as well as operas, and I've done those at a very high level to all sorts of celebrated people.
And royalty.
I've been very lucky, some royalty and very famous people. And actually, in a way as well, what that does, you just go, they are people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
They're not, you've got something that they can't do, that you can give and that you can share. And I think that's one of the ways to get over nerves and things, to think about what you want to share with somebody and just the music that you share, the joy of the music. And whether that's you being in an operatic performance or in an opera gala where you're having to switch between roles suddenly, or doing, as I did, a lot of operas that were cut down into sort of 90 minutes or something. So it gets quite an intense experience as well. Different costumes. I've had some horrendous wig moments, I have to say.
Really? Nothing's fallen off on stage, I do hope.
Almost. I remember doing a performance of Madame Butterfly for a small company, and I'd got the wig on and had been dressed, but during the show, I was playing the part of Suzuki, which is the maid, and that's a killer of a role because you're on your knees for most of the time and you're cleaning up after everybody always. You're taking tea trays here and there. You have to do the Japanese tea ceremonies and everything. But I was sort of doing a lot of head nodding and heads down and head back up, and I felt the top of my wig move, and I thought, oh my God. And I then spent the rest of the show kind of with that slightly stiff neck.
Yes.
And turn,
Oh my goodness.
At one point, Suzuki has to go to sleep at night, and they go to sleep just sort of face down and sort of kneeling down. And as I put my head down, I actually just felt the front of my wig, it just unfurled. And so all this hair arrived in front of my face.
Oh my God.
I was laughing, of course. I mean, and I just, God knows what the audience were thinking. And when I got up, I then had to take this swathe of hair and pull it back so that you could see my face. No, I mean, there's too many things that have gone wrong, I have to say. So.
Oh, I love that story. I would just love to have been in the front row.
I would have laughed even louder if you'd have just laughed out loud, really, honestly.
Oh, that's really, really wonderful. I love stories like that. And they're just so fun to look back on, aren't they?
Oh, yes. I mean, afterwards, after the event, you get through them. I think that's the thing. I think sometimes people get very worried about what if it goes wrong. You have to plan for it potentially to go wrong. You have to think a thing about singing is and performing and being in those situations is that very quickly you learn to adapt extremely fast. Your reflexes kick in. And the worst thing, as everybody will recognize as a performer, is you do not want to be left looking like a lemon on stage or with egg on your face or whatever. So you will do anything to preserve your what you've got left.
Yes, keep your dignity.
Dignity as well.
Yes. So along the way, do you think there's anything that you know now that you wish you'd learned sooner?
Actually, yes, I was thinking about this, and I think it's a very general thing, actually, and it can be applied across various different parts of your life, but it's to trust your intuition, funnily enough. You have, as a performer, you develop a lot of, well, you've probably already got it actually, a lot of intuition and feelings about things. And to know that somehow, if you've got the goal in your sights, you will get some way towards it. So not to give up, not to be put off by lots of things that other people say, and it's very easy to be influenced by others. And there's a fine line between taking the wisdom of somebody else or being completely disempowered by somebody else. And I think what I've learned is to trust me, and that my instincts were right. So I think what happens is when you're younger, you totally trust your instincts. Then you learn, oh, don't know, no, that can't be right, let's think, and you start to overthink it. And it's when you get back to kind of my stage in life, you go, do you know what? I would trust your instincts. They're usually right. That little feeling you get inside
Yes.
is usually correct. You've got to be true to yourself. I mean, I think that's the key thing, is that you have to be true to yourself. And you will come across people whose map of the world and how they work it is very different to yours. And it's an opportunity for learning. I mean, always thinking about learning and growing and having integrity about what you're doing. I think integrity is a key component. And if it's not meant to happen for you, I'm a great believer that you will be shown that somehow. Whereas if it is, you will get little ticks along the way. So, for example, for myself, very early on, I won a singing competition. Against all the odds, I'd never won a singing competition in my life. And this is a bit of a strange story, but talks about a deeper knowledge, really, that one has. When I was preparing the items for all the different rounds, potentially, of this competition, I was sitting in my bedsit, looking at all my music, thinking I'm going to do something different. I'm going to do something new and different, because I love learning new music, different music. And I actually chose to put a Kurt Weill song in, a French song of his called Je ne t'aime pas, which is a fantastic cabaret song of his, into this very serious singing competition, serious competition. And at the moment that I started putting that program together, I suddenly had, and I don't know how to describe it. It was a complete understanding that I was going to win that competition. I knew I was going to win it. Now, I'd never won a competition in my life. I'd been in for a couple and not got anywhere, maybe got through to the second round or something. So this was like not coming from a past experience, but I knew. And then, of course, that was a moment where I then decided not to trust my intuition at all.
Oh.
But interestingly enough, after several rounds and over several weeks, I did win it. And it was just an amazing, and that was a sort of validation for me. So that was my moment of validation, if you like.
That's wonderful. I think that, I mean, got to be honest, that's a little bit what I've been going through this year, almost feeling like, I don't know. Would you describe when you were going through that thing of planning your route? And if you plan things with fine detail, you can just make them happen, can't you? But it's like the initial idea almost feels like it's being channeled from the universe or something. That's kind of. I feel very guided by the universe in everything I'm doing at the moment, and I know that makes me sound a little bit kooky, but some of these
That's
things.
all right. I'm in the cookie camp, as well.
Maybe that's why I'm particularly drawn to you. But I do think that there's more to it. There's definitely more to to the inspiration that we get and that feeling that we're charged with.
And also, you were going back to childhood and things, but I was thinking, right from my childhood, I just knew I wanted to do this. I only ever wanted to teach and to sing. And actually, I've done both of those things. And I think there's something to be said for the fact that once you know, I think it's awful if you don't know what you want to do. I think that must be, there's so much to choose from. Whereas I was quite narrow in my field. I didn't know that I was going to get there in either of those fields, it has to be said. But I think that by channeling and really focusing, you start to eschew all the other options along the way. So you're right, the more detail you put into something, the more likely you are to get there. There might still be something that takes it out and says, actually, this isn't for you. But the more likely you are to get there, simply because you stop looking for other options. And
Yes.
you find that you notice the options that come to you that tie in with what you want to do.
Yes, absolutely. Completely in agreement with you there. So you've done your training at Guildhall. You've gone to Kent Opera. How did your journey to the Royal Opera House happen?
Well, it was all just building on top of that. So, I mean, I got an agent, I got a couple of agents, and again, you audition for people, you get heard about. When you win competitions, people start to notice you. Obviously, you're standing out slightly at that moment in time. And I finished at Kent Opera, and I was doing lots of concerts, to be honest. So I was doing more recitals, which is something I absolutely love. That's kind of my key thing. I did a lot of oratorio, but I was going for opera auditions. I did a thing called YCAT, which, oh gosh, it used to be called the Young Concert Artists Trust. It's called something else now. And I was the first mezzo to be taken on by them. And that sort of helped in the management process and in introducing you to different people. And it just over time, I came to do understudies and what we call covers, different companies, with English National Opera, with Welsh National Opera, and I sang a role for Welsh, and then I got to the Garden. And funnily enough, I was quite late to the party getting into Covent Garden. And when I got there, I opened the door, and it was like all the people I'd known from the last 15 years. There they all were. It was like being, oh, this is the party you all went to.
Oh, wow. That must have just been the most amazing feeling, though, for that as an accomplishment.
Yes, walking in the stage door at the Opera House is lovely, and everybody is just lovely in there, and I never take it for granted. Put it this way: anything I do that is part of the dream, I never take that for granted, and I always send up a quick, "Wow, thank you." Here
Yeah.
I am, and so, yes, I didn't work for very long at the Opera House, and I only ever did covers there. But it was marvellous to be around that level of expertise, my friends, coaches. You have to work. It's not a free ride. But it was, yes, it was a sort of pinnacle of me saying, do you know what? I can say one day that I did walk in that stage door for a reason.
Absolutely. It's an incredible story, especially when you consider your beginnings, your dreams. So
Yes.
how that journey happened. It's exciting to speak to somebody who's been on that stage. You know what I mean? 'Cause
Oh
I
yeah,
haven't done that
standing
before.
on that stage and
Yes.
singing out, it's very beautiful. Opera houses generally are constructed for sound, and so it helps the voice. Although, to be honest, sometimes then you've got the orchestra pit and you've got to get over that. But it's a privilege. You hear your voice in that space, and it is amazing. I've done auditions in all sorts of opera houses as well, and I did a big tour of South America with my husband and our pianist John, and we did 9 concerts in about 3 weeks, all around Argentina, and also been to Chile, and also Peru. And that was, again, astonishing. And coming back from that, Classic FM had just started up. and they asked us to go on the programme. So I'm the first person, this will be something I'll take with me to my grave.
I love
I
this.
was the first person ever to sing live on Classic FM. I sang the first note live from anybody ever.
And what a claim to fame that is. That's an amazing accomplishment.
You know those moments when somebody says, tell me something that I don't know about you. I sometimes use, well, I can't use it now, but I sometimes use that.
No, it's a brilliant thing to have happened, and no one could ever take that away. That's a brilliant thing. So I mean, Classic FM and I go back a long way. I can't say that I was listening to that performance. I probably wasn't on that day, but I love classical music, and I did grow up listening to classical music. We had a really good head teacher in my junior school, and every assembly in the morning he would play a different piece of classical music as we were coming into the hall, and we would all sit down, and then he would spend the first 5 minutes of assembly telling us about the composer and what the piece was. And it made us, actually, I found it very relaxing. It was like a lot of the music was just lovely music. And opposed to all the other music I listened to, it didn't have any words in it. So we didn't get to listen to opera, but we were listening to classical music. And I love Classic FM for that reason, because I have so many songs in my head all of the time. That my escape is classical, but I'll go to it where it's instrumental classical, if you know what I mean.
Well, funnily enough, that's exactly what I do. So I run a radio show on the internet now, and I thought that I would be playing, sung music all the time. It's almost the last thing I play. I have to remember to put it in sometimes. I just love instrumental and orchestral music.
Me too.
And I just play that endlessly. I was surprised myself by my choices.
Yeah, that's wonderful. No, I think it is when you're around voice all the time, you almost need quiet time or just music without voice, I think, sometimes just to turn off.
I would agree.
So now you work with other people's voices, or have done for many years. Have you had any sort of light bulb moments in either working with your own voice, your development, or with other students that you'd like to share?
So, again, interestingly, I've been very interested in taking on lots of different ideas in teaching, lots of different, different methodologies have grown up over the years, and I've been really fascinated to play with those. But I'm going to put my cards on the table and say I basically teach the school of Janet Schell, and because of my teaching background, I always work from the student. It's called, student-centered learning, pupil-centered learning. And I always go from what's in front of me and then unpeel the layers. And, often it's about, if somebody comes to you, they've already got something going on for their voice, or maybe something that they're not sure how to unravel, or you just hear something that's stopping them, preventing them from making the best sound they could, or whatever. So I think what's now at this end of my teaching life, I'm quite, again, going back to my instincts, which say, do you know what? I wasn't wrong in the way I first started teaching, but I felt that was just based on me. But I had actually had some very good instruction. And and whether I'm teaching music theatre or classical music, and there's big differences coming out between those now, but I think the voice works the way the voice works. The vocal cords come together, you've got the mechanics, you've got some space, and you've got your mental approach to how you do it. You want the breathing, the posture, they don't alter for whatever you're singing. I think a light bulb moment for me was just realizing that you can put many different layers on of how to sing, and how to sing this particular bit, how to sing Wagner as opposed to singing Mozart, how to sing Rodgers and Hammerstein as opposed to singing Sondheim or something. But actually, in the end, you can't sing any of that unless your chords, as everything is working, the mechanism is working at the basic level that's going to enhance you and be effective.
Definitely agree. I mean, underlying whichever type of musical category or genre you're in, if your sort of basics aren't sound, it's never
Yes.
going to work quite right, is it? You know, you really do need all those things in place.
And it's amazing for all of us. Once we're performing and doing things, there's this lovely phrase that you have to perform on forgotten techniques. So all that practice, that 10,000 hours of practice or whatever, it actually helps you arrive at a place where you don't have to overthink everything, and you can just, to an extent, once you've set everything in place, set off and sing, and you can be then doing more with the interpretation, more with the actual performance, more reacting to what's going on around you. But I think that takes quite a long time to get to, and a sort of trust.
I was just going to say that place where, for me, when I talk about the podcast being called vocal freedom to me is that place when that all lines up and you can trust your voice and you're in the moment, you're present in the performance, and
Yes.
you're not thinking about technique, because if you are, you're not in the moment, are you? You're thinking about the technique. So absolutely true.
But the great thing about technique as well, though, is that if you know what your technique is, if you know what you do to make your voice work the best, if you're on a day when you're, because it's very rarely all the ducks line up, let's be honest,
Yeah.
So there are often many performances where you might have a slight cold, or you're just feeling a bit under the weather, or emotionally you're not feeling great, or something happens, or the building's horrible, or whatever. You just need to have something that you can rely on that will make the voice get through and work for you at that moment.
Yes.
It's about knowing your voice. At every stage, you should know your voice.
Wonderful advice. And what does your voice mean to you?
Well, I mean, like everybody who's invested in singing, so actually putting your voice into an extraordinary place as well. It's not just your speaking voice. I suppose I'm going to say that old corny thing of "it is me," and I nearly had it taken away from me. And at that point, that was when I realised how much, well, everything I do is connected to voice. So whether it's my broadcasting, my teaching, my own singing, I work with teachers on their voice in the classroom as well. Everything I do is voice connected. And you see, I have a strap line for my company, which is to do with the training teachers and their speaking voice. And it's something like, once you find your true voice, nothing can hold you back. And you see, I think that's true for us in life. So your voice is so much more than an instrument. It's very much about who you are. And I think that what I notice that people who are disconnected from their voice are sort of disconnected from a part of themselves. So, I mean, that all sounds very grand and very spiritual and things, but I do think of it that way. It does mean everything to me. And I had a vocal hemorrhaging that went on, which is unusual. Only about 0.2 singers get that. And thankfully, eventually it was sorted out through an operation. So, at that point, when I was about to go under the knife, the surgeon said, "Oh, could you just sign this piece of paper basically to say it's not our fault if it goes wrong?"
Oh,
And, I sort of laughed. I sort of, "Don't worry, you just got my career in your hands." But of course, there is a point in any big thing that happens in your life, and often fate will come for the thing that means the most to you if you're not listening to yourself, if you're not listening for what's going on. So that moment you have to meet yourself and you have to say, what if I can't sing again? What if I cannot talk very well again? What if this does go wrong? You have to not avoid those questions. It serves you better if you deal with those and make peace with yourself, so that you can be open to what happens. And if it's another journey, so be it. As it happened, the best singing I've done, even though I won all my competitions before that, the best singing I've done has been since I had that operation, because it sorted out what was probably a congenital thing. My surgeon said, "You've probably been hemorrhaging for about 20 odd years." And therefore, the technique that I was taught by all my singing teachers has been so brilliant, because brilliant okay, it helped mask the problem, but it did mean that I could get on and sing and make a reasonable noise despite that.
Yes. That must have been such a relief, though, when you got through your recovery period and it was
The first
working.
time I sang, afterwards, I went to my old singing teacher, Laura Sarti, and I sang for about, they said, just do 10 minutes, do a bit of humming and things. And I sang flat. And I never sing flat. And I was horrified. I was like, oh my God, my voice. And I was tired. It was vocally exhausting. But I didn't, again, I knew I'd been given a second chance. And therefore, I was going to honour that. And I just worked very gently and carefully. And only a few months later, I was doing a concert, a live concert. And I did a radio broadcast not long after that, a Friday night is music night or something. And that's a point where you think, well, if it's not going to not work, it's not going to work in front of several thousand people, hey ho. But it's about having the courage as well, the courage
Yes.
of your convictions and the courage that faith that the universe will be with you, that if you're meant to do this, somehow you will find a way through it.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of the saying that life will take you where you're supposed to be. And I love the fact that there was a lot of open-mindedness in your journey there, because you could have been in really panic mode, which might have hindered your recovery. But being so open to the fact that, well, okay, if my voice is taken now, I'm going to find another path and I'll survive this. And of course, people, humans are incredibly resilient. So that resilience is wonderful to see and hear about, and encourage our listeners to build on their resilience as well. Because some people really do fall at the first hurdle, don't they? I think that's quite sad sometimes.
Yes, no, I agree. I think that actually building your own resilience, and it is about that whole thing where you have to face yourself and you have to look at when things go wrong and say, okay, what am I going to do? What do I have to do here in order for me to move forward from where I am at this moment in time? It's the most important thing that you learn.
Now, I'm going to go back to voice care just for a moment. And I mean, whether you've got a different view on this since having surgery, I don't know. But what have you found most valuable in caring for your own voice?
Well, I'm going to come back to something I said earlier, which is knowing it.
Yeah.
So over the years, I've got to know that, everybody will say, oh, my voice feels X, Y, Z. And for some people, that's more serious than it is for others. So somebody will say, oh, my muscles are aching. Actually, generally, that's not a good sign. Let's be honest. But I've heard people that I've worked with really push their voices, quite hard in rehearsals and then concerts, and then be very husky. I think actually the care of your voice needs to start through all that. So probably having the courage to not always sing out for every rehearsal, knowing when to give the conductor the moments that you've got to give them so that they know they've employed the right person, and then being able to pull back and do what's called marking, which is a great thing we do in classical music. So you sing, it's almost like you've gone into the next room, but you're singing with the same level of emotion. but it's so all the technique is there,
Yes.
but you're singing with much quieter volume. And I think that knowing my own voice and knowing that, because after an operation, everything after that, you always worry that the same thing's going to happen. Okay. So even 15, 20 years on, I still go, oh my God, oh gosh, it's happening again. Oh, I'll clear the voice and all this. But actually, I've learned that it isn't. And that it's my voice's reaction to what I'm doing. And to be able, I think the most important thing is, when it's not going well on any particular day, as long as it's not a concert day, walk away and do something completely different so you don't keep banging on the same thing and create a habit, because voices are very habit forming.
Yes, very good advice there. Thank you very much. So as a teacher and a broadcaster and a book writer and an opera singer and all these lovely things you do, what's now your favourite area of voice work?
Well, I love teaching singing. I mean, I always love hearing different voices, and I love that light bulb moment for other people when you can be along their journey with that. Something you might say suddenly unlocks something for somebody else. That's such a privilege, actually, let's face it. But for me now, where my focus is going is I'm very interested going back to teachers and how I know what it's like to be in the classroom. I know what it's like to face the students who don't listen to you and when you have to raise your voice despite your best intentions. But teachers are not given this level of voice training inevitably. So there's always voice dysfunction in teachers, classroom teachers. Of course, now it's a really difficult time as well. I'm looking to what happens when teachers are going full time back into the classroom because they have not had the robustness given to the voice because they've not been in the situation. So their voices have relaxed. So they all probably think, oh, my voice is feeling great now.
Yes, because they've had a rest.
Because they've had a rest.
Yes.
But actually, this is the key moment when they need to be putting in some kind of vocal technique for the spoken voice. So I'm really keen to promote that much further. I've been doing it for the last 13 years under my company Talking Voice, and I go around and I work all around the country with different trainee teachers, either in groups. I mean, I did my first online training session with some individuals just recently, and that's, again, you have to adapt slightly to that. Also, this whole thing about teaching on Zoom or whatever you happen to be working with, makes you use your voice slightly different. We end up sort of projecting. I mean, I can hear myself doing it now, but you're in performing mode. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
So
completely.
I'm really very interested in that, but I'm also interested, you see, alongside that, I've taken 2 courses whilst I have been in lockdown, neither of which are to do with voice. And yet I think are inherently connected with voice. One is on emotional intelligence, and the other is NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And I've allegedly become a master practitioner at that. I mean, I haven't practiced much, but I am doing some practice I'm sort of, with people I trust, I'm sort of having a little play. But those are things that have been part of my journey all the way along anyway, as the fullness of the person that I'm trying to be. So I just thought I'm now going to be a bit braver, because it's very easy for people to say different things, like we've just said about the spiritual stuff, and it's regarded as a soft skill, and how does that? Yeah, it's really not. How does that work? But it absolutely, your emotional state and your voice are linked inextricably, hardwired together. And I think the more that people, particularly teachers, but singers too, learn this, then you can help yourself much more. And that's what I'm sort of going towards. So it's not therapy as such. It's actually a practical way of bringing that to your more conscious thinking.
That sounds incredible. I mean, actually, I was speaking with a speech and language pathologist from Ohio yesterday, the lovely Kerry Obert, and it was interesting hearing her share that she worked with Joe Estill back in the sort of, she was 19 when she worked with her, and then did a lot of her training as Joe's work developed over the many years. And she was saying it's really interesting, having spent so many years sort of really focusing here, how she's now gone back into sort of, it's a whole body experience. Do you know what I mean? It's much more like being embodied with yourself, so that you can use your whole body to support, not just support your voice, but to support your intention and what it is you're trying to express.
And of course, that you just used a really fantastic word, which is embodied. And it is, so like I was saying to people who are disconnected from their voice, it's about learning to embody the sound that you make, and then playing with that, of course. Patsy Rodenberg has done a lot of work on this as well, and I totally concur with that. And I think that in all of these things, my focus is that it needs to help you take a step forward somehow. It can't just be something that sits around in your brain and it's a lovely thing to do, and oh, maybe one day, oh yes, and perhaps that's doing that, or maybe, it needs to be guided, so that you say, so that's probably the NLP bit of it, the next step that you take, how are you going to take what you've learnt here into a practical way of using your voice or moving forward in the next thing that you're doing?
You must have heard and worked with some phenomenal singers, especially when you were really in these wonderful opera houses. But I wondered what other voices inspire you and who you could never tire of listening to.
So, I'm a high mezzo, and the Italians have a phrase for it, I think it's mezzo falcone, but nobody else seems to bother with that. But it really is a specific voice type. So it's a kind of in classical music, it's the Dora Bella in Così fan tutte. And, for me, that role sits perfectly, or Rosina in Barbara Seville, both of which I've done. Carmen, interestingly, is a much harder role for me because I don't have the weight of voice to do that. So the first two acts are fine, and then it's like somebody else has walked in come act three when it gets darker and it needs a more dramatic voice. So the people I've enjoyed listening to are the people who have clear tone and totally, again, embody their voices, and it sounds easy. So although I don't think she always does sound easy, somebody that I was inspired by as I grew up was Janet Baker, and I watched that wonderful Channel 4 documentary recently about her, or BBC 4, sorry. But somebody else for me was Frederica von Stade, who was great Falcone mezzo. So, that's that in between mezzo and soprano almost, where the height of the voice is something that you find terribly easy. I tell you something I find very interesting when I say to my students, the first thing I do is I say, sing me a note that feels really comfortable in your voice that you love singing. And to me, that gives an indication of where the voice is sitting.
Yes, that's a really cool thing. I like that.
If I do that for myself, it's always up round about D above, way above middle C, above the D above that, which is actually really almost a soprano place. Yeah. So that's quite interesting. But I love, and then think people like Barbra Streisand. What a phenomenal voice. And it's absolutely and I'm going to say something that a lot of singing teachers don't like this now, but I'm afraid I work with it. It's in the right place.
Yeah.
It's a place that you can I can feel it. I can feel what she's doing when she sings. Yes, well, so I loved her voice. And Julie Andrews is the other one who's, again, it was just a clear voice that you could hear what was going on. And it was all seemingly it was under control for a long time. I mean, ironically, we had a pretty similar operation. So that was it was after hers hadn't quite had the outcome that they wanted, that they were asking people to sign pieces of paper to say it wasn't their fault. But you talk about that, I actually have done occasionally just had moments. Do you know, I mean, he's dead now, unfortunately, Errol Brown from Hot Chocolate.
Oh, my mother was a huge fan.
Well, he lives not far from me, and one day I picked up the phone and this voice on the other side of the phone was going, "Hi, I hear you give voice coaching." I said, "Well, I'm a singing teacher." I mean, this was years ago. I'm a singing teacher. And he said, "Oh, yeah, I know." I said, "How did you get my name?" Didn't know who it was. And he said, "Oh, I'm a bit of a pop singer, and I've got a tour coming up, and I'm a bit nervous about it. I've lost a bit of confidence, and I wondered if I said, "You've been recommended." I said, "Who recommended me?" He said, "Oh, the music shop." So he'd gone really interestingly, like classical singers would always check out with other people who was the person to go and see. He'd just rung up the local music shop. Thankfully, they knew me. And I ended up working with Errol Brown so that he could go on what turned out to be his last tour. And he was a bit suspicious at first. And I went to his house to do the work. But actually, he again was a really nice person. And, we sort of had a bit of a laugh along the way. And he was a very high tenor, actually, had amazing tenor sound. And he just loved the work that we did. And
that's wonderful.
So it's the same sort of thing that you get the privilege to work with some people that have already got the talent there.
Yes. Ready to go. But of course, sometimes the mind gets in the way, the thoughts get in the way, the performance anxiety takes over. And all of those things are very interesting to me, and how to help people overcome that. I'm doing some more training at the moment for it. So we've got Barbra Streisand and Julie Andrews and some of your classical people you mentioned. If you were to think of a performance that you think embodies vocal freedom, can you think of anything that that I could put a link in our show notes for our listeners to go check out this voice on this song?
Well, I know it's not going to sound, I don't know what you're going to think of this, but I'd say something like, the person that springs to mind is Elton John or Freddie Mercury, actually.
Really?
Those people, Freddie Mercury particularly, you know, he was just able, I mean, he did all sorts with his voice, but he had an incredible voice and he just took the risk. It's about taking risks.
Yeah.
You know, vocal freedom is about risk taking.
Definitely.
So it's a risky performer that isn't obviously screeching on their vocal cords.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, you could immediately think of examples when both Freddie Mercury and Elton John did that.
Yes.
But, you know, I would say that they inhabit the whole idea of taking things, extending boundaries,
Yes.
and taking a risk. And that is, in the end, as a performer, what you need to do. It is, for me, you know, I've been to many beautiful performances of people who've been very contained, and it hasn't moved me.
Yeah. Yeah, I can get that. I know what you mean. It's those moments of risk, and it's not exactly what I would call improvisation, but it's almost like being so free and trusting in the music and in your voice that you may make slightly different choices. And I'd say both with Elton and Freddie, I've sometimes worked with singers that want to sing one of their songs, and we've looked at some live performances rather than listen to the recordings just to see how they do it differently. And they pretty much do it differently every time you look up that song, and that's another skill too, isn't it?
Well, that's about being in the moment. That's about knowing your stuff, knowing what you're going to do, and then going to the edge of the cliff and going, right, I'm going to jump. And because your audience makes you feel that way, or makes you feel, people can't make you feel things, but you know, you are inspired by your audience or the situation, or you're in the right zone and you just want to give. Of course, all performing is about giving. So it's about giving out to the absolute edge of where it's, you know, great performance is about being on the edge and not falling off it.
I love that.
Knowing where that edge is. But you've got to go beyond it first to know where your boundaries are.
So what's coming up for Janet next?
Yeah, so I have a website, which is janetshell.co.uk. And within that, you can see, you're right, I'm a bit of it's called a portfolio career, isn't it, really? You know, where I do lots of things, but they are all connected to voice. So, of course, what was coming up for me, I had several, because I still perform, I had several concerts, which have all gone, and also some of the teacher training that I was doing. So that's why I have been looking at how I can use my skill base in this completely new setting and, you know, totally different environment in which we find ourselves at the minute. Now, assuming that we do get beyond that and this isn't a forever, it won't be a forever thing, you know, it'll be all about working with the teacher trainers. Definitely I want to be doing, that's something I can do, you see, for a long term. I will continue singing as long as I can because I was given another chance with this voice and I have to honour that.
Yes.
I will continue singing, and because get me on stage with an audience and there is some symbiotic thing that happens that you can't put a price on, you can't describe unless you've been there, and you never know in that audience who that matters for that day as well. I mean, that's something I've learned over the years as well. But also I do want to move forward with thinking about emotional intelligence and how we reframe ourselves and how we can take some of the adverse things that happen to us and use them in a positive way or help ourselves live with those. Because sometimes somebody says, oh, you just have to get over that. But that's not a very interesting piece of advice because, A, how do you do that? And it might be something, maybe we shouldn't be getting over things. Maybe we should be learning to live with them and put them in an appropriate space that means we can move forward and then they're not going to impinge on every day of our lives. So I'm interested in that for performers. I mean, I think I see myself, you know, if I had all the money in the world, I would buy a mansion and I would develop it, sort it out so that it was a holistic singing school.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That I'd love to do.
Yeah.
And I would invite in other people, and I'd be talking about, people who work with your body, people who work not just with voice, people who work with the looking after of you as a person, because all of that, nothing's ever wasted, you see. As a singer, nothing is ever wasted. It goes into your performing. So your worst moments in your life, I think the message I'd like to say to people is the worst things that happen in your life are probably there for a reason, even though that's horrible and doesn't feel like it. But if you can find a way to work with that, the performer you be will be outstanding. Make a difference for somebody else.
Absolutely. Oh, I love your answers today. Thank you so much. And what I will also say is that I think it was last weekend, I was coming to the end of quite a stressy day because I'd had a lot of problems with Zoom because Zoom didn't let us know it was doing an update. I had lots of meetings, people couldn't get on, and it was a bit stressy. And then I went onto my phone for a bit of relief and flicked through Facebook, and I saw your post with you singing Smile to your little community. Oh. And it made me cry, but in such a good way. I was so grateful for hearing that in that moment because it did make me smile. It was singing the song Smile, the Charlie Chaplin song.
That's right.
And I didn't see that coming, actually. I was just smiling to myself thinking, aren't I lucky I'm going to get to speak to Janet soon for my podcast? Isn't she wonderful? What a lovely thing you're doing in your community, singing like that. And then just towards the end, the melancholy of the song just hit me like a brick. And your voice was so beautiful, it did bring me to tears. So thank you so much for that too.
Yes, well, I don't know whether to say, oh, good, you're welcome.
No,
but,
no, it was, no, I'm welling up now. I'm a real emotional person. But I do think voice sometimes, the way that you can connect to another person through their voice, and you can express something, you can release something, even through hearing someone else's voice sometimes. I think that's wonderful.
And it's not always, you don't always know, and you don't know that as a performer. That's the other thing I want to say is, you can be standing there singing something, giving your all, and not feeling, because we all need to feel we get something back, not feeling you're getting anything back. And then at the very end of the performance, somebody comes up and says something to you that is just, it's overwhelming.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today, Janet. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you'd like to add for our listeners before we go?
No, I think I've probably said quite enough, but I want to thank you for the opportunity. What's lovely about what you're doing is you're giving somebody a synthesis, a way of just bringing together all their thoughts that can be quite random. We all have really random thoughts at times, and it's lovely every so often, and I like to do this as well, is to just sit down and just be quiet and focus on through your questions, which are great, by the way, which just allow you to decide what you want to say about something. And it's been lovely because I'm a real rabbit. I'll rabbit on for hours, so don't let me carry on.
Thank you so much. It's been really, really lovely to hear about your career and your journey, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining me on the Vocal Freedom Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the episode and will move into your day with a bit more vocal freedom, feeling that you can express using your voice and let the world hear what you have to say. Visit colchestervoiceacademy.com/podcast. Sign up to be kept informed as new episodes are published, and consider joining our online community. Membership to this will allow you to post questions to our guests, link you to show notes, social media links, and entitle you to exclusive offers from our guests. See you next time.